In the heart of London, covered by dense vegetation and a constant mist, stands a gate. He does not lead to a garden, but to a stone theatre for the dead. This is the Highgate Cemetery, a masterpiece of Victorian funerary architecture. But what lurks among the tombs and marble angels are not only memories, it is a dark legend, a presence that refuses to rest. If you have the courage to unlock the secrets that the city has forgotten, sign up now, because the story we are going to tell today is not for the faint of heart. To understand Highgate, we need to go back to 1830 London, a metropolis suffocated by its own dead. The parish cemeteries were overflowing, a health crisis that threatened public health. The solution was to create a ring of 7 monumental cemeteries on the outskirts of the city. Highgate, consecrated in 1839, was the crown jewel. It was not just a burial site, but a declaration of status, a necropolis designed to be as impressive in death as the life that its wealthy occupants took, a real park for the deceased elite. Highgate's architecture was designed to be an experience. Its creators wanted a world apart. The path leads to the spectacular Egyptian Avenue, a corridor flanked by obelisks and vaults that evoked the funerary rites of the Nile. Further on, the Circle of Lebanon, built around an ancient cedar, houses catacombs in a hypnotic ring. Each statue, each mausoleum and every Gothic detail was thought to impress, to intimidate with the solemn majesty of death, transforming grief into a grandiose and unforgettable architectural performance. For decades, Highgate was the ultimate destination of London's elite. However, the 20th century brought abandonment. The cemetery, too expensive to maintain, was left for nature. The ivy covered the names on the tombstones, and the roots of the trees displaced the tombs, exposing what should remain buried. It was in this setting of sublime decadence that the atmosphere changed. What was a monument to mourning became the perfect stage for horror. The shadows between the mausoleums seemed longer, as if the oblivion of the living had awakened something that slept among the dead. In the late 1960s, whispers became screams. Local newspapers began to publish reports of a tall, dark figure with bright eyes, seen wandering through the malls after nightfall. Witnesses described an overwhelming feeling of dread and an inexplicable cold. Others spoke of a pale face peeking through the bars. At first they were treated as mere rumors, but the reports multiplied, becoming more consistent and terrifying. The question that, hovering in the air of London, was inevitable. What or who was this entity? What really haunted the stone corridors of Highgate? The murmur of Victorian hauntings, however, was about to turn into a deafening scream. In the late 1960s, stories changed drastically. It was no longer melancholy spectres or echoes of the past, but something tangible, predatory. Letters began to reach the local newspaper, the Hampstead and Highgate Express, describing an abnormally tall and dark figure with eyes glowing in a hypnotic red, seen slipping between the tombstones. Witnesses reported a sudden drop in temperature and an oppressive silence preceding its appearance. Small animals were found dead in the area, with blood apparently drained. Fear, formerly a Gothic curiosity, began to solidify in genuine panic. The entity was no longer a passive ghost. It was a hunter. In this cauldron of fear, 2 men emerged, destined to become the protagonists and archenemies of this dark saga. On one side, David Farrant, a young practitioner of Wicca, who believed that the entity was a psychic manifestation, a dark elemental fed by collective fear and the necrotic energy of the graveyard. On the other side, Sian Manchester, a self-proclaimed bishop and vampire hunter who advocated a much more terrifying and specific theory. Manchester claimed that a nobleman from Wallachia, a practitioner of black magic, had been brought to England in a coffin and buried at Highgate. Now, awakened by satanic rituals, he was a real vampire. The battle would not only be against darkness, but between two worldviews, two personalities that collide spectacularly. Their rivalry poured gasoline on the fire. The local newspaper published their letters and theories, and what was a local rumor exploded into a national sensation. British television did not take long to arrive. In an interview that would become infamous, Sean Manchester, with a deadly seriousness, declared on ITV News that a vampire was out there and that he personally would exorcise him. It was the trigger for mass hysteria. Suddenly, Highgate Cemetery was no longer a tourist spot. Dark. It was the epicenter of a supernatural threat. London was officially in the midst of a vampire fever, and the media fed every delirium, every new sighting, turning a genuine fear into dangerous and out-of-control entertainment. The height of the panic came on a fateful night, Friday, March 13th, 1970. Driven by the reports and appeals of rival hunters, a crowd of hundreds of people descended on the cemetery. Young, curious and self-proclaimed vampire hunters, armed with makeshift wooden stakes, crucifixes and bottles of holy water, climbed the locked iron gates. The police were called in to control the chaos while the mob searched the dark catacombs, desecrating tombs in their frantic search for the monster's lair. It was a scene of collective madness, a modern witch hunt where the line between the defender and the vandal became dangerously thin, all under the watchful eye of the full moon. The great hunt did not find any vampire, but the damage was done. The legend, instead of dying, was cemented forever in popular culture. The event turned Farrant and Manchester into occult celebrities, and their rivalry deepened, lasting decades in a war of words through books, documentaries, and mutual accusations. Each claimed to have confronted the creature, performed secret rituals, and be the holder of the true story. But the absence of concrete evidence only deepened the mystery. Would it have been all an invention devised by two men in search of fame? Or did the hysteria of the crowd and their rivalry only serve to cover the truth, scaring away something that really awakened and perhaps still lurks in the shadows of Highgate? But the vampire fever, with all its panic and media spectacle, served as a smokescreen for a more complex truth. While rival hunters competed for the spotlight, the other souls of Highgate continued their silent dance. The shadowy figure was only the loudest soloist in a chorus of specters that haunted those boulevards long before modern hysteria. The cemetery was not the home of a ghost. It was a metropolis of restless dead, each with your own tragedy, your own reason for refusing to leave. Perhaps the most tragic of these souls is that of Woman in White. Witnesses over decades report the same vision, a female figure, dressed in a faded shroud, floating desperately between the tombs. His legend is a whisper of madness and regret. They say that she is the spirit of a woman who, in an act of despair, took the lives of her own children and then hers. Now she is doomed to roam the cemetery in an eternal quest, her lament, silent echoing among the crypts, looking for those she herself destroyed. Another appearance defies logic, the enigmatic coconut hat man. He does not interact, does not threaten, he simply exists. Visitors describe a Victorian gentleman who walks purposefully down the main avenue. His footsteps make no noise. And when he reaches the high brick wall that surrounds the cemetery, he does not stop. He continues walking, crossing the wall as if it were fog. With so many stories intertwining, which one scares you more? The night hunter or the lost souls? Leave your comment and don't forget to like it so we can unravel more of these mysteries. But not all the ghosts of Highgate have a definite form. Perhaps the most disturbing are the unnamed phenomena. They are the faces. Visitors often report the overwhelming feeling of being watched. When they turn around, they expect to find someone, but see only the dense tangle of ivy. Looking closer for a fraction of a second, they see pale and distorted faces staring inside the foliage, empty eyes, open mouths in cries. Silent, They don't move, they just watch, silent witnesses of every step. These entities are not isolated events. They form a supernatural ecosystem, a web of energies attached to that soil. The woman in white, the man with the coconut hat, the faces in the bushes. They are the permanent inhabitants of Highgate. The vampire may have been the storm that attracted the attention of the world, but these other spirits are the constant climate of the place, an atmosphere of sadness and latent dread. They are the guardians of the secrets of the cemetery, each appearance a fragment of a larger story, suggesting that we know only the surface of a much deeper abyss. Faced with such a frightening chorus of stories, the modern mind seeks refuge in logic. The stories of the vampire, the woman in white, and the faces on the bushes created a legend, but also attracted a different kind of visitor, the researcher. Armed not with stakes and crucifixes, but with electromagnetic field meters, thermal cameras and audio recorders, dozens of paranormal groups entered the gates of Highgate. They came in search of irrefutable evidence, an anomaly, measurable that could validate decades of fear. The goal was clear: capture a ghost in data, transform the ethereal into empirical, and prove once and for all that something beyond our comprehension inhabited those lands. The hunt was no longer for a monster, but for truth, whatever it was. However, the truth has proved to be as elusive as the specters themselves. The evidence collected over the years is a mosaic of ambiguities. Photographs display orbs, which skeptics quickly attribute to particles of dust or moisture reflecting the flash. Audio recordings capture supposed electronic voice phenomena, ghostly whispers that can be equally interpreted as radio interference or the human brain forcing sense into random noise. Points. Colds are detected, but may simply be drafts in an old and poorly sealed architecture. For each piece of proof presented, science offered a worldly explanation. The smoking gun, the indisputable evidence that would separate fact from folklore, was never found. The silence of the data was, for many, more deafening than any spectral scream. This is where we enter the fascinating field of pareidolia. This is the psychological term for our brain's tendency to perceive familiar patterns, especially faces, in vague or random stimuli. That's why we see animals in the clouds or a face on the moon. In an environment like Highgate, pareidolia becomes a powerful tool for self-deception. The way the ivy grows on a tomb can create the illusion of a human silhouette. The play of light and shadow through the branches, twisted, can form for a moment a pair of watching eyes. The mind, predisposed to fear, does not need a real ghost. It is perfectly capable of creating one from the chipped stone and decrepit vegetation, filling in the gaps with the material of its own nightmares. Another scientific explanation, even more disturbing, lies in infrasound. These are low-frequency sound waves, below the limit of human hearing, but which the body can still feel. Studies have shown that exposure to infrasound, between 7 and 19 Hz, can induce feelings of anxiety, dread, sadness, and the feeling of a presence in the environment. In some cases, the frequency can make the eyeballs vibrate subtly, creating the illusion of shadowy figures if moving in peripheral vision. Highgate, with its stone corridors and mausoleums that create complex wind tunnels, can be a perfect natural generator for these frequencies, creating a terror that is neither seen nor heard but deeply felt. Finally, there is the undeniable power of suggestion and the psychology of fear. When you enter a place with the reputation of Highgate, your brain is already on high alert, prepared for the supernatural. Every unexplained sound, the crack of a branch, the howl of the wind, the creak of an iron gate, is processed through the filter of fear. It is not just a sound, it is the proof that one was looking for. The human mind craves narratives and in the dark weaves stories to explain the unknown. Perhaps the greatest ghost of Highgate is not a disembodied entity, but the expectation itself, a force so powerful it can turn shadows into monsters and silence into whispers, haunting us from the inside out. And so, after confronting the cold logic of science, we return to the dark heart of Highgate. Investigations brought more questions than answers, leaving a vacuum where the evidence should be. But the absence of evidence was never the evidence of absence. The vampire, the lady in white, the man in a hat are not isolated entities to be dissected by skeptical analysis. They are the interconnected chapters of a same chronicle, a supernatural ecosystem where grief and fear feed, weaving a tapestry that reason alone cannot unravel. The real protagonist of this tale, perhaps, is the cemetery itself. Highgate is an amplifier of whispers, a catalyst of the inexplicable. Its Gothic architecture, with stone angels weeping rain tears and mausoleums keeping a heavy silence, creates the perfect atmosphere. Nature, with its twisted trees and ivy that suffocates tombstones, seems to conspire to hide secrets. The energy of thousands of lives and deaths has permeated the soil, and perhaps what people feel are not individual ghosts, but the collective echo of a past that refuses to die. But why this fatal attraction? Because the spectres of Highgate are mirrors that reflect our deepest concerns about mortality. The vampire is the embodiment of our fear of predatory death, of existence that feeds on life. The woman in white is the incarnation of eternal pain, of grief that does not find solace. When searching for them among the tombs, we are not only hunting ghosts, we are, in fact, confronting the shadows of our own finitude, proof that something, anything, remains after the end. This is the immortal legacy of Highgate. It has transcended its function as a resting place to become a cultural icon of the unknown. The hysteria of the 70s, fueled by media rivalry, not only created a legend, it engraved the cemetery on the map of popular imagination forever. Highgate has become a global stage where ancient folklore meets modern curiosity. It inspires books and nightmares, serving as a reminder that even in the age of science, we still long for the mystery, the shiver that only a good ghost story can provoke. In the end, the truth about Highgate may be less important than the questions it forces us to ask. Is the graveyard really haunted by grieving souls? Or are we the ones who haunt it with our fears, our hopes, and our need to believe in something beyond the veil of reality? The answer remains hidden, guarded by shadows and iron gates. Perhaps the true haunting is not in the spirits that roam its alleys, but on the border, uncertainty within ourselves, between what we see and what we desperately want to see.